So the Minnesota Timberwolves, they're moving on in a new direction. A new life has been instilled in this franchise, a breath of fresh air, if you will, after Tom Thibodeau has been fired and the Timberwolves are moving on. Glenn Taylor, as much that I have piled on this dude and others have, fans, media members, and rightfully so, because he seemed to be an owner that was more so complacent than anything else, doesn't really understand the sport of basketball. You can just really tell. Apparently, he's had enough. I don't know if the obvious is Tom Thibodeau just can't establish any relationships with his players, and the on-court product was just awful. Or I don't know if it's the fact that they went from 21st in attendance last year in 2017 to 29th in the league now. So second to last in attendance, that's not going to really cut it. I don't know if that was the ultimate deciding factor in that. But kudos, you got to give a little bit of credit to Glenn Taylor, because this is a guy that justified the Andrew Wiggins max contract, talking about, I made him look me in the eye and promise that he's going to change his game. Yeah, all right. But you know what? Credit where credit is due, because based on Glenn Taylor's history and his track record, if the Timberwolves were going to move on from Tom Thibodeau eventually, it will be one of two ways based on Glenn Taylor's track record. It will be, one, you would let Tom Thibodeau's contract run out, so you would let this thing just burn into the ground as much as you can until ultimately his contract runs out and there's nothing else you could do about it. Or if Glenn Taylor was to say, you know what, I'm going to fire him, it will be after the season. But Glenn Taylor, he put his big boy pants on. Not only did you fire him mid-season, not only did you fire him after a game, you fired him after a 22-point victory against the LA Lakers, albeit without LeBron James. But you would have thought, oh, they just won, maybe that buys them some time. But no. And you know what? A couple of things that, before I get into the on-court product of Tom Thibodeau, a couple of things that he screwed up. There are several things that he screwed up, but probably the number one thing, I don't blame the fact that you traded for Jimmy Butler. I think it just didn't work out, but it's just what you gave up for Jimmy Butler. I'm on record at the time of the trade saying that I would have kept Zach LaVine and I would have traded Andrew Wiggins. If you're going to give up one of those dudes, it would have been Andrew Wiggins. Chris Dunn, I probably would have kept, but certainly I would have kept that draft pick. And I'm not saying this hindsight 2020. I said this at the time of the trade, that if the Chicago Bulls would have went for it, I would have gave up Andrew Wiggins instead of Zach LaVine. Granted, now Zach LaVine was coming off that leg injury. You don't know if he was going to recover or not. I still would have took my chances on Zach LaVine ahead of Andrew Wiggins, who I compare to Anthony Barr. They're the same player. They play when they want to. But then not only that, past that trade, okay, fine, it didn't work out. It blows up in your face. The guy that you traded for, the guy that was basically Tom Thibodeau extension on the court, he basically blew up and went into practice and raised all holy hell and called Rachel Nichols for that press conference or the interview afterwards, and basically saying, demanding a trade, you can't win without me and all this stuff. And it was, quite frankly, seriously embarrassing for that franchise. So the fans, they probably had enough. They stopped attending, and it's like, clearly, not only do you take that aside, but as far as the on-court product, look, man, it got to a point with the Timberwolves where it's like, if you're talking Timberwolves podcasts or writing or whatever it is, it got to a point where it's like, all right, what are we going to talk about this week? Let's spin the wheel on the Timberwolves. What are we going to talk about? It's basically like one of 5 different factors or one of 4 factors where it's like, okay, you're running your starters into the ground too much. You're not using Cat more. It's like you're not developing a game plan around Cat. Karl Anthony Towns, the last 6 games, he's averaged 30 points, close to 30 points per game, 16.5 boards, and 5 dimes, okay? Now, that's in the last 6 games. Now, that happens too many bursts or too many spurts throughout the seasons instead of consistently. Not to say that he's going to average 30 a game, 16.5 boards. That would be fantastic, but you need to run your game plan through Karl Anthony Towns. Who cares that he's a big man, much to the likes of the New Orleans Pelicans with Anthony Davis, or before he left Sacramento and went to New Orleans and now with the Golden State Warriors. And when this dude comes back, people talk about this dude's Achilles injury. I'm telling you, this dude is not an athletic freak. He's not going to jump out the gym. His game is based on all skills. So all he's got to do is get his stamina, his cardio back, and his shot back, and he's good. Boogie Cousins back when he was with the Sacramento Kings, and Joel Embiid minus Ben Simmons. Basically, you develop your game plan around those particular guys. They need to do that with Karl Anthony Towns. We've been saying that forever with Tom Thibodeau, but instead you're letting Andrew Wiggins take stupid shots. You're letting Jeff Teague and Derrick Rose. Derrick Rose has had a really good year this year. Kudos to him. But you know what? it needs to be ran through Karl-Anthony Towns. So what are we going to talk about? Running your starters into the ground, not running your game plan through Karl-Anthony Towns, not benching Andrew Wiggins for taking stupid shots all the time. That's coaching. Or not playing your depth that much. Anthony Tolliver, why did you bring Anthony Tolliver onto your roster if you're not going to play him? You need a wing player that's going to hit some threes once in a while. Why don't you play this dude? So it just got to a point where it's like, this is just really embarrassing, and you just get tired of talking about the same stuff left day in and day out, to where it's like, and then, the other thing is, okay, the 1 out of 10 games where Andrew Wiggins goes off, you're like, oh, maybe this is the game that's going to give him that spark. But it was time for a change, and I never thought I would see the day that a change would be made like this. Now the Wolves, they have an opportunity to start fresh. Hey, this firing of Tom Thibodeau was done before the trade deadline. Maybe they can make something happen with that. Taj Gibson, his contract is going to be up. I think you need a better point guard instead of Jeff Teague. There's so many things that you can do. Play maybe. Oh, another thing. Oh, are we going to talk about how Josh Okogie needs to play more? So now that that's over with, Ryan Saunders is now going to be the interim head coach. This dude, you know why I'm furious about this? I'm going to tell you why I'm furious about this. This dude is 32 years old. He is now the youngest head coach in the NBA for over the last since 40 years. Okay, this dude is 32 years old. He's 2 years older than me. The reason that I'm furious right now is that I'm not doing anything with my life. I'm just sitting here doing a podcast, and this dude is a head coach in the NBA. So really, I'm just hating. I'm just kidding. But you know, this is a really good opportunity for this dude, the son of the late Flip Saunders. And you know what's interesting? Just a little bit backstory. I'm from the Washington, D.C. area. I remember when Flip Saunders was the head coach of the Washington Wizards. I remember that when he was with the Washington Wizards, and the Wizards have stunk forever. So this is just one of those things, okay, he's the coach now, like, let's see what happens. I had no idea the history that he had with the Minnesota Timberwolves. That was back when I was super young, but I had no idea of the history that he had with the Wolves franchise, the fans and all, and the players, and you could tell Karl-Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins, they loved this man. They absolutely loved him. But all that aside, I'm excited to see what he does. Now, they're going to play the Oklahoma City Thunder tonight. But you know what? I would caution fans out there. Yes, this is a great thing. This is a great opportunity. Let's see what they're going to do. I would imagine that Ryan Saunders is going. He mentioned a quote talking about, you know, if you can, and I'm paraphrasing, whereas if you can communicate with your players and get them to understand you, then that will translate to the on-court product. So he already seems like a guy that can at least develop personal relationships, or at least strong relationships with his players to where they can respect him. I had a real tough time buying the fact that maybe players respected Tom Thibodeau. And in fact, Karl-Anthony Towns was quoted as saying, I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but Karl-Anthony Towns was saying that he expected a little more new school NBA from Ryan Saunders. So we'll have to see how that works out. You know, the trade deadline is going to come up. I've been saying time and time again, you need to go for Terry Rozier. There's so many different things that you were going to do, but it seemed like Tom Thibodeau was just stuck in his ways, and it needed a time. The change just needed to be made. So as far as where do you go from here? I've seen now for the rest of the season, we'll just see how they do. Will they make the playoffs? I don't know. Let's actually take a quick look at the standings right now. The Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference, they're 19-21. So they're 3 games. They're 3 games out of the 8th seed right now. So that's with the LA Lakers. And you know what? I think the Clippers, I think they're going to fall apart. The Western Conference, I think it's going to fall apart a little bit. It's really crowded in the Western Conference, but can they make the playoffs? I highly doubt it. But you know what? Ryan Saunders, maybe he can turn this thing around. I would say initially, I would caution fans, if you see a little bit of a jolt in this team, maybe it's that new energy that they have. We'll have to see how they play out for the rest of the year as far as through those growing pains. But you can't really blame Ryan Saunders if anything goes wrong or if anything goes south with this team, because he's a new head coach for the very first time. But if you see some new life in this team, whatever. I remember when I went to college after 18 years with my mom, and you know, being raised by her, she was super strict. But when I went to college, I had this new life in me. I was like, yeah, I'm ready to kick some ass. So who knows? Maybe they're just ready to be free of Tom Thibodeau. Those players are, and so we'll have to see how it plays out over the long haul through the rest of the season. But as far as where do the Wolves go from here, assuming, or we're talking about after the season goes, I mentioned, and you know, it's funny. After Tom Thibodeau, the news got announced that Tom Thibodeau got fired. I was like, man, that's really cool. Okay, fine. Finally, finally, now the fans got something to cheer about. Then I saw Fred Hoiberg's name attached to the Wolves. I was like, are you serious? Oh, goodness, you're really following the path of the Minnesota Timberwolves. But, I think John Krasinski, if I'm not mistaken, he debunked that saying, it's not definitive or he's not a name, whatever. But I also saw Chauncey Billups' name attached to it. If you can make that happen, not as a head coach, because I just have a little bit of hesitancy with star players or really good players, or key players that won a championship or whatever, but were really, really good to star players or all-stars, whatever, that become head coaches in the NBA. I have a hard time believing the fact that those players can do it. But if you're talking about him being your general manager, because Scott Layton, this dude's going to be gone too. You need to do a complete overhaul of this team. Chauncey Billups this dude knows basketball, okay? So as far as a GM is concerned, I think Chauncey Billups should be that number one guy that you're going after. Outside of that, I like to see a little bit more Karl-Anthony Towns. As far the last 6 games, he's been lights out. But over the long haul now, I think Ryan Saunders or whoever eventually is going to be the coach of this team is going to understand we need to run this team through Karl-Anthony Towns. He doesn't need to be the bystander of Derrick Rose, who's had a good year jacking up shots, or Jeff Teague, who's a ball-centric point guard. Derrick Rose is too, but at least he's been a lot more efficient at shooting the basketball than Jeff Teague has. Karl-Anthony Towns can't be a bystander of those guys. He needs to be the main guy, and we never saw that with Tom Thibodeau, seemingly. But outside of that, Andrew Wiggins, this is your redemption. This is his final opportunity of a redemption tour, because this dude, he's gone through a couple of coaches, Flip, Sam Mitchell, Tom Thibodeau, and now Ryan Saunders. I think this is his last opportunity to try to make some noise and prove to himself, or prove to the others, prove in the organization, not just the fact that, forget the fact that you trying to convince them that you deserve that contract. You don't. I don't think he will ever live up to that contract. When they signed that dude to that contract, I was like, this is the dumbest thing that you have ever done. And that was ever since you made that trade for Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, and Lauri Markkanen, that draft pick for Jimmy Butler. Not the fact that you traded for Jimmy Butler, it's the fact that you gave up Zach LaVine and decided we're going to keep Andrew Wiggins. But you know what? Forget the fact that you're trying to convince people that you deserve that contract, because you don't. You need to convince others or people in that franchise that you still deserve to be a starter. Because if you're still going to take those mid-range long twos of, basically a left and a right and a spin around fadeaway two, or taking a quick step from the three-point line to the inside the two to take a super long two and just bricking them left and right, you need to be on the bench. And I hope Ryan Saunders, or whoever is eventually going to be the head coach of this team, I hope that they realize that, because you got a guy in Josh Okogie that can take his spot on the starting lineup. And Andrew Wiggins, this dude can come off the bench. If I was a coach, Andrew Wiggins would come off the bench. I don't care about his 1 in every 10 games where it's like, oh, this dude, he's finally going to show out now. This is the game. This is where he's going to get started. Nah, man, because then he goes back into his funk after that. But your lineup, and Dario Saric, this dude needs to start. He is your future of the Minnesota Timberwolves basketball, or part of the future of Minnesota Timberwolves basketball. You're talking about a starting lineup that should be, as of right now, if I was to do it, I would have Derrick Rose be the starting point guard, Josh Okogie be the starting 2, Rocco, when he's healthy, the starting 3, Dario Saric, the 4, and Karl-Anthony Towns, the 5. And then after that, I play Anthony Tolliver more. I play Tyus Jones. I get rid of Jeff Teague, and if you can get Terry Rozier, I would have Terry Rozier be your starting point guard, and then have Derrick Rose be your backup. Should he come back as far as Derrick Rose? I think he should. I think he's shown enough to where, if you can work something out or work out a deal for Derrick Rose to come back, I would do it if I was the Timberwolves, but that's not set in stone. But there are so many things. I think they're going to be more fast-paced. You're going to see a lot more life in this team. Hopefully they play more as a team, because honestly, when you watch the Timberwolves under Tom Thibodeau and switch, defense, blah, blah, it was just exhausting to watch. And quite honestly, the players look exhausted, not just because they were playing 38 minutes a game, but the fact that they just looked like that they were fed up with the dude. So this is a new opportunity for the Wolves to take charge. Who knows what will happen, but as far as in the future, Chauncey Billups, I think that's the main thing you need to do. Chauncey Billups. This dude knows basketball, and I think he can evaluate talent. And if you can get him, and who knows, maybe an all-star lineup, if the heavens, the basketball gods just sent you Chauncey Billups, and let's say Mark Jackson is your head coach, wouldn't that be phenomenal? That would be some crazy stuff for the Wolves. So I'm excited. I'm excited the fact that there's some new stuff to talk about, not just for my podcast, but I'm sick of talking about the same stuff with this team, because until something happens with Thibs, it's going to be the same thing over and over again. But Glenn Taylor, he put his big boy pants on, and now the Wolves, they've got some life again, and the fans have something to be optimistic about for real this time. So anyway, we do this twice a week. This is the 1500 ESPN's podcast. On Saturday, you can find my podcast on YouTube. Just search Realistic Randy. You can actually look up, you can look it up on YouTube, iTunes, Twitter at Realistic_Randy, Facebook at Realistic Randy. We will see you on Saturday.